Is Legion going to be the worst card ever added to Marvel Snap? I, I don't know if it's necessarily going to be the worst, but this card is awkward. I don't know where it's going to fit in the meta, if at all, but it looks really, really fun. So Legion is a 5/8. On reveal, replace each other location with this one. So let's say he's chilling, I don't know, at Kamartaj. Okay, so he's going to activate at Kamartaj, turning the other two locations into, you guessed it, Kamartaj, which is pretty neat. I think that's going to create really crazy scenarios. So what I've done in this video is I have a bunch of the mechanics. We always got to talk about the mechanics so we know in depth how this card functions. And then we're also going to look at locations. I've got a full list of locations and I've broken them up into what I think is going to be most effective if it rolls in your games and you're playing a Legion deck, or most disruptive, or just neutral, because there's a lot of locations that are just going to basically do nothing, and you can kind of neutralize the board state with Legion, which I think is an effective strategy with this card. Now, another really important note here is the spotlight caches. As you guys know, the economy of the game has shuffled around, and now you can open up a spotlight cache to get the brand new card that week, but there's other rewards included. And I have to say that I think this week is absolute fire. So you have High Evolutionary, who's a big bad, and he's 6,000 tokens permanently. And then you got Darkhawk, who's a Series 4, I'm going to call him pseudo big bad, because that guy hasn't dropped since forever. He's been Series 4 for as long as I can remember, and he's 3,000 tokens. Pretty juicy opportunities to get some really meta-defining cards. But you also have a chance to open Legion, who I don't think is going to make the cut in a lot of lists. Now, if you're new to the channel, we do these every single week. For each new card, we do a preview to get you those insider details, to give you a better idea of whether you should pick up this card or continue saving your precious resources for maybe that next release the week after. So definitely subscribe so you can keep up to date with these Marvel Snap previews. So Legion doesn't have a whole lot of mechanics. It's a pretty straightforward card, right? On reveal, and it's going to change the location. We've seen that in a lot of other cards like Scarlet Witch, Rhino, Storm, etc. But there's a few little nuances that I wanted to talk about. For instance, timed triggers, okay? So timed triggers are not going to reactivate if the turn has already passed. A clear example of this is TVA. TVA ends the game after turn 4, but if it's turn 5, then it's already past that condition and it will not reactivate and end the game on turn 5, okay? So if you play Legion and it rolls on TVA somehow, I don't know, you'd have to Scarlet Witch and then Legion it and then get a bunch of TVAs. But anyways, it could be done. It could be done, but any of those time triggers are not going to reactivate. Turn 4 Storm into turn 5 Legion does not work, okay? So basically what you'd be doing on turn 4 with Storm, you're flooding the location, and turn 5 Legion is going to make the other location start flooding, so that when turn 6 comes around, you can still play cards there. Now, of course, that combo could work really beautifully if played in advance. Somehow you can, like, I don't know, play Storm on curve and then roll into Legion if like Elysium was out or something like that and gives you the discount. He's cheaper. You can play on turn 4. Then by turn 6, those locations will be flooded and nobody can play cards there unless they have Jeff. But otherwise, I don't think this is a combo worth looking at and trying to make happen. I don't know if this actually has any implications on the game, but I did notice during the little preview video that Team Second Dinner did for all of the cards that Legion changes the locations from left to right. That is pretty standard. It's just like how locations reveal turn 1, 2, 3 respectively, left to right. So that makes a lot of sense. But hey, I don't know, maybe somewhere down the line that actually has an impact on Legion's viability. Okay, and lastly, if moved by Arrow or Juggernaut, Legion will activate at the new location, which actually makes for a bit of a nasty little counter in these two cards, because you probably played Legion at the location that you want the entire board to change to. And now it's going to change to something else that you didn't foresee, and you might be in a pickle. So that's kind of neat right there. Some pros to Legion. So Legion is going to be amazing when there's featured in hot locations, okay? So like, it's one of those cards like Super Scroll, right? That can be a very strong card in certain featured hot locations, but when those roll out or phase out, you don't really see that card as much anymore. Maybe an occasional meta counter, but for the most part, don't see them a whole bunch. Legion is one of those cards. Let's say you're running a zoo deck and Mojo World is the featured location. you're going to have such an advantage. All you have to do is flood the board, not care about your power, and then you play Legion at Mojo World to turn the other two into Mojo World, and it's just a matter of who has the most cards. Like, there's a lot of instances where this could be a thing. Another one could be like, let's say it's Sewer System or any of those locations that give negative power, and you're running Luke Cage. You put Luke Cage on the board, and then you change all three of them, and if your opponent didn't really plan accordingly, didn't have that in their deck, didn't draw Luke Cage, then bam, they get hit with all that negative power, and you don't even have to move anything. It's like playing Hazmat. So like, there's some really sneaky opportunities here for Legion to be meta defining during these featured hot locations. But I honestly feel like that's where his viability is going to lie, only in those given moments. So it can be disruptive, it can be surprising, it's going to be entertaining. This will be a fun card. It's going to make some crazy YouTube shorts and highlights and Twitch moments. I guarantee it. Especially when it's like a random card that you got generated from, I don't know, Triskelion or something like that, right? One of those random effects that puts a random card in your hand, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, well, maybe I can make this work. Or maybe you won't be able to make it work, because one of the biggest cons is location variance, the RNG aspect that is inherently built into the game completely defines whether Legion will be a viable play in that given game. If it's 3 locations that basically do nothing, they're just neutral, they're flat, or they're time triggers, you can't get Legion out sooner, then they're gonna do nothing by the time you go to play this card, and then he's just a 5/8. Not the worst thing in the world, but you probably could have synergized your deck a little bit better. You could have optimized it a little bit better if you had taken out Legion and put something else. And that's ultimately where I just have a hard time with this card. It's just an awkward card to add to your decks. There's very little synergy with other cards, and it's a 5 cost. And time after time after time, we've seen 5 costs just be in a weird spot where if they're not like that finisher that complements a 1 cost on turn 6, it's kind of hard to justify those cards. There's a few outliers, like of course there's good 5 cost cards like Iron Man, right? But then we could also look at Phoenix Force that didn't really kind of make the cut and had to get changed, and now it's a 4 cost. So it's not necessarily a knock at 5 costs in general, but a card like this where they're very niche ability that's also a 5 cost, I don't know if it's going to make the cut later on. But here's the best part. The best part about Legion is that it's a Series 4 release. It's only going to cost 3,000 tokens. I don't know when it's ever going to drop to Series 3. We still don't know much about the Series drop, so I can imagine that he's going to stay at Series 4 for quite some time. So if you are interested in this card, then you could pick him up at a discount, essentially. 3,000 tokens compared to 6,000. That's a huge deal. But the other kicker is that tokens are way harder to get nowadays. So while this is really alluring pricing, it's not really, comparable to how the economy functions now. So I can't really say just because it's Series 4, pick it up, because it's just harder to get the Series 4 tokens. But if you're really stoked about this card, go for it. It's your tokens, you do you. All right, so here are the locations that I was referring to. So I have pretty much just about every single location in the game. I've excluded a few, but you get the idea, okay? So there's some crazy combo potential. Now, the biggest problem here is that it is reciprocal. Your opponent has equal opportunity to do some crazy combos, but they're still gonna be super fun. So I think it's gonna be really excited if any of these locations are the ones that you decide to play Legion at. For instance, you could look at Warrior Falls. Oh my gosh, everything's fighting all the time. You have to have high power things on the field to win the game. The Raft could be crazy because if maybe locations are already filled and you would automatically get that card right away. Maybe your opponent hasn't filled it yet, and then you get it before they do. Elysium is just insane. Now your entire hand is discounted by 3. That goes for you and your opponent, of course, so they could, pull off a crazier combo. But hey, that's still pretty fun if you got a lot of cards in your hand. Camartage is insane. Onslaught Citadel is insane. Project Pegasus gives you plus 15 energy on turn 6. That's 21 energy. That's nuts. That's going to be a good time. Mojo World, as I discussed, is a pretty fun one as well. There's a lot of combo potential here. In the disruption category, though, I think we're actually going to find more value out of Legion. Because let's say Bar with no name is up. It's the first location that shows you're playing a Legion deck. You decide to not play a single card the entire game, and then on turn 6, you play Legion at bar with no name. If your opponent committed any resources at the other 2 locations, they just got screwed. Collapse Mine is a really funny one. You could play Legion on turn 5 at the Collapse Mine. It's going to fill the other 2 locations full of rocks, and the only turn that they can pass to remove those rocks is turn 6, unless Limbo happens to be out there, but it won't be because you played Legion and it turned into Collapse Mine. So then they pass on turn 6 to get rid of those rocks, and you could probably lock out your opponent from playing anything. The only problem is you're going to do the same thing to yourself. That also goes with something like Morag. If you play Wasp and Legion on turn 5 and then you play Legion at Morag, well, now there's nowhere to actually play the first card in Morag. That's the condition that is required. You have to play a card elsewhere before you can play there, and now they're all Morag, so you can't play anywhere unless you got Jeff. There's things like Space Throne, or maybe things that add other cards to that location, like Savage Land, Shadowlands, these sorts of things. They're going to spawn a bunch of things, and that could be really annoying for your opponent, or lock their locations up because they didn't have the available space. That could be a lot of fun. Jeff is actually, I don't have him in the synergy cards, but now that I look over these locations, Jeff is actually a very good card to pair with Legion because you just don't know what you're going to hit, and Jeff can go anywhere. The neutral locations are basically locations that I don't think are really going to have a huge impact on the board state, or it's going to be so extremely reciprocal for you and your opponent that it's not a big deal and probably shouldn't be a focus. One that might, stand out on the page is Bar Sinister. I don't think that one's all that great because you're playing Legion on 5 to create Bar Sinister. If you happen to have priority, the cards that your opponent plays are going to get duplicated by Bar Sinister, and they might get more value out of that than you will on turn 6. So it's a bit risky. It could be really good, but it also could be a total whiff. There's a lot of time-gated locations here. Those aren't going to come in play unless we play Legion early, which is unlikely. So don't take this list to heart. This is just a basic example of what I wanted to showcase, that I think a lot of the locations that Legion is going to end up rolling at are going to be neutral. They're just going to provide a neutral effect and not really swing the game in one way or the other. Some of them have some pretty crazy effects, but again, it's reciprocal, and I think that's the biggest challenge with Legion. Now, he does also have some counters. Of course, he's an on-reveal, so Cosmo is a massive counter. If you play Legion into Cosmo lane, then it's not going to do anything. That's sad days. Like I previously mentioned, moving him before he's revealed could be a nice little juicy strategy with Arrow and Juggernaut. I don't think you need to tech these cards in even during his week of release. I don't imagine this being in a lot of lists in a few weeks' time. Galactus is another counter. He can't change the locations if there's only one, so it doesn't matter a whole lot. Stegron also adds to the Arrow Juggernaut play. He can actually slap unrevealed cards, could slap Legion, could be very disruptive. And then Spider-Ham is here because it's a 5-cost card, and it might end up being the highest cost card in your hand. But overall, I feel like the mechanics are so simple that you don't have to worry about being countered with this card. It's more about maximizing the value that you can get off of Legion's ability. And how should we do that? Well, we could try some of these decks and these key synergies, right? So the biggest one that I want to talk about and recently changed is Magik. I was so excited to see this change to Magik. She's such a fun card, but just was awkward and difficult to play because you basically had to play her on turn 5 previously. Now she's a 3-cost card. You can play her early and create Limbo. Now, you would have probably thought that I'd put more cards here that change locations, right? So that Legion is more reliably going to create a board state of the same location that you brought in your deck list. Well, it's not actually the case. There's not a lot of good ones. Like I said, Storm doesn't really quite work. I've got Rhino here if you want to create ruins and just completely neutralize the board, but that's not all that great either, now is it? You could do Scarlet Witch, but then you don't know what you're going to get. You do a little bit of a rotation and hope for the best. Snowguard is actually quite interesting, yet extremely complex. If you were to change everything with Legion, and then you wanted to play Snowguard on turn 6, if it's the bear, you can maybe reactivate some abilities if they didn't have a turn timer. Another time, something like Wakandan Embassy that gives +2 power to the cards in your hand, but then that's even awkward. So I was like, I don't even know how Snowguard works, sadly, despite this should be her time to shine. The Eagle, the Hawk, could work, but that's a turn delay. It disables the locations the turn after, so you'd have to find a way to play that on 5 with Legion. So it just becomes a little bit awkward. Colossus, I thought, could actually be a really sneaky one because there's so many locations in the game that destroy things, or you can't play there because it'll destroy it. And if you change them all to that, you can still play Colossus there. That'd be kind of nice. And a nice little tech option to have in the deck in case that pops up. And then lastly, Sarah. Sarah is just so good with this card because it makes it a 4 cost so that on your turn 6, you can change the locations to whatever you need to do while also playing a 3-drop, which is now costing 2. So something like Juggernaut or Killmonger or anything like that. I think that could be really spicy, especially if it's a location that would really disrupt your opponent. They've been leaning in heavily on it. And then boom, turn 6, you play Legion and swap it all around. Or what about turn 7? Because we got Magik creating Limbo now. Now, I don't even know if you necessarily want to turn it into Limbo, but let's say you did. Well, turn 7 control is a pretty good list because you can turn all the locations into Limbo. Once again, neutralizing the board state, right? Not too shabby. Or you could do this play where you create Limbo, you play Sarah on 5, and then on turn 6, you play Legion plus one of those cards I was mentioning, like Juggernaut, Killmonger, anything like that. And you eliminate Limbo with a pretty big swing. And maybe that location that you changed benefits you, and your opponent thought they were going into a turn 7, but they don't, and it flipped the script all of a sudden, and they lose the game. We're seeing that already right now with like Storm replacing the Limbo location after you've already played Magik pretty early, but this could be a little bit more of a power burst on that turn 6. And it also has some nice other alternative options here. Sarah discounted the Shang-Chi, the Enchantress, the Killmonger, and all that stuff, so that if we actually do go into turn 7, we have a lot of abilities to counter whatever my opponent has been setting up through turns 1 and 6. The Citadel is just kind of an example of a deck that I would bring if Onslaught Citadel happened to be the featured location. So I just wanted to kind of like show that, like, I think this is how Legion is going to work. The turn 7 control deck is the only one that I could see myself running consistently, or in Conquest or something along those lines, right? Whereas the Citadel is an example of, yeah, that one day where Mojo World, Onslaught Citadel, like whatever it is, you're going to build a deck like this, not ongoing if it's something else, but you know, the idea of building around Legion and hyper focusing on one location, creating this deck to win you some cubes pretty early on. I think that could be nice. And then RNGesus, that's just a meme. I just thought it'd be so funny because inherently Legion is random because of the location variance, right? So let's put Agatha, let's put Morph, let's put Nick Fury, Agent Coulson, Agent 13, Maria Hill, all the agents in there. Why don't we even throw in M'Baku? Because why not? And just have a good time and see what happens. I think it would be just really funny. So that's the deck list I came up with. Again, struggle to theory craft for this card because I don't think it is necessarily a card that you're going to want to put in your decks that are synergizing with each other and have great combo potential. Whereas Legion, if you put them in those decks, it might be a bit of a brick, a dead draw in a lot of instances. All right, so in conclusion, like I said, I wanted to hold myself accountable. I think this card is a pass. I'm going to go with a pass. I feel like pretty safe with that one, you know. Even though it's 3,000 tokens, I would say maybe go for that. Save your Spotlight caches, guys. Unless the only opportunity where I'd say maybe use your Spotlight caches this week is if you don't have both Darkhawk and High Evo. If you have one of those and you're hoping to get the other, you're now in a 1 and 4 rolling state of gambling, or 2 and 4 if you don't mind picking up Legion, and then it's a 50-50. And Spotlight caches take a while to grind up. So my recommendation is hoard your Spotlight caches. September is looking like the month to save them for. And if you do have the available tokens, you're really excited about this card, go for it. Personally, I'm going to pass. I'm going to hold on to my tokens for a card that I'm more excited for. I would love to try this card. It looks a lot of fun, but the economy isn't in a position to allow me, and I think a lot of people, to pick up these new cards, not just yet. We're getting close. Hopefully we get there eventually. Now, I'm going to have more details about this in snap.fans article. The link will be in the description. That should be coming later on in the weekend or Monday before the card drops, so definitely stay tuned for that. In there, I'm going to have a little bit more context to Legion's strategy and those deck lists that I was talking about previously. But anyways, thank you so much for watching, everybody. Snap subscribe if you're not subscribed. I super appreciate it. But as always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.